that well.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another event, a Mad Street Madness virtual event here at Madison Street Books. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Lara Ehrlich, Blair Hurley, and Perl, now I've lost Perl's,
Wolfe.
Oh, Perl Wolfe, there we go. See, I told you I would flub somebody's name. And Perl Wolfe. Pearl's going to treat us to some beautiful music this evening, so we're especially fortunate, not just two fabulous authors, but a beautiful musician, so it's a treat. I'd like to introduce Lara. She is a debut short story author. Her new book is called Animal Wife, Lara Ehrlich, Lara has a really illustrious career. First of all, she is a second-degree black belt, which that fact alone kind of caught my eye. I'm like, okay, how often does one get to meet a second-degree black belt? And somewhat more interesting, but maybe really not, she is the director of marketing at the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. Which I think would be a fabulous job. I can't even imagine how many creative people, interesting, fascinating, talented creative people she gets to meet every day. So I think that's pretty cool. But truthfully, coolest of all is the fact that she got to go to the Sirens of Deep camp where the witchy-watchy mermaids are. Like, I can't, like, I don't want to take away from your book because there's nothing better than that, but wow, the witchy-watchy mermaids. And there's an article about it in LitHub, so you can check into that as well. So that's pretty exciting. And Lara is in conversation with Blair Hurley, who is also a debut author of a novel this time, not short stories, but a novel. Her novel is called The Devoted. And Lara is a writer and teacher of creative writing at the University of Toronto currently. And she is the co-editor of the Two Cities Review. So she is also very talented and gets to meet some pretty interesting creative people all the time. But she also has an interesting little story. She has written something called How to Become a Nun, a Practical Guide. And I keep thinking like, okay, how did we get so fortunate to have a mermaid and a nun on tonight? So that's pretty exciting. And then we have Perl, who is here from Chicago, Perl Wolfe, a local Chicago musician. And I think she's going to kick us off with some music. So I'm pretty excited to listen to tonight's program, and I hope all the rest of you are too. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and thank you for having us. This is going to be a lot of fun. And thank you, Blair, for partnering with me for this event. Blair and I go way back.
Absolutely. So glad to be here. Hi, everybody. And yeah, just really excited to chat with you tonight, Lara, about your amazing collection and to hear some great music as well.
Yeah, and we're going to turn it over to Perl first. Perl, like Mary said, is a local Chicago musician. Her newest album is called Late Bloomer. So I think she's going to play us a song from Late Bloomer, but she'll confirm for us. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to start with a song from Late Bloomer. It's called It's a Party. And this song is all about how there doesn't necessarily need to be negative competition in every thing that we do, because I feel like whatever it is we're doing, whether it's the field we work in or Instagram comparisons, whatever it is, people are really competitive, especially these days. And this song is about like, there's room for everyone. And not only is it not going to reduce our own shine to lift other people up, but it will enhance our shine if we kind of make room for everybody and recognize that there's room for everybody. So I feel like especially as women, it's important because we often get pitted against each other, and I feel like that's starting to change, I hope. So yeah, anyway, the song's called It's a Party, and I hope you like it. It's not a competition, it's a party, and everyone's invited. We don't care about what you wear, just what your inside is. There's room for you, there's room for me work together, think of what we could do. I don't know about you, I see a revelation. It's not a competition, it's a party, and everyone's invited. Please don't come around here just to get everyone inside. You bring your heart and I'll bring my soul. One day the world will see we are just parts of one whole, and it's starting to show. I see a revelation. You and I may not always see eye to eye. You and me, we can agree to disagree and just let it be, and it's all right with me. I see a revelation. It's not a competition, it's a party, and everyone's invited. Ring the bells, make some noise, we're getting everyone excited. Let's share our views, every color and hue. We'll bring them all together with harmony and truth, and nobody will lose. I see a revelation. You and I may not always see eye to eye. You and me, we can agree to disagree and just let it be, and we'll all be free. I see a revelation, I'll be free. I see a revelation, I'll be free. I see a revelation. It's not a competition, it's a party, and everyone's invited. Oh no. Did my screen turn off in the middle?
No, yeah,
Oh.
we saw you build on. That was fantastic.
My screen went black when I looked up.
No, that was great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Perl.
Fantastic way to start the evening. So great. Thank you so much. Lara, I'm so glad to be chatting with you this evening.
Me too.
I can say just for our listeners that we met quite a few years ago now at a writing conference, and we immediately felt this sort of kindred spirit of writerhood, I think, as we started talking about our own processes and the sort of stories that inspire us and excite us. So over the years, I've just had, every time we reconnect, I feel so grateful to chat with you about what's inspiring you. So I'm so excited to have this in my hand, this beautiful, gorgeous collection, and these stories are stunning. There are so many things I would like to ask you about your writing process. So maybe I'll just start with asking you about what short stories mean to you in general as a form, and what it means to you to have your debut be a short story collection. You know, as you were putting these stories together, what were you thinking about that the short story can do that, say, other forms of writing can't? What do you like about short stories when you're writing them?
Sorry. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think something I love about short stories is the compression of space and time. I mean, obviously short stories are short. They're shorter than novels, shorter than other types of fiction. And something I love about that compression is that you can tell a whole story that feels complete in a very small space, whether it's a flash piece, like some of the stories in here are just a couple lines, or a longer piece, more traditional short story, maybe 10 to 15 pages. But they feel complete within their own worlds, kind of like, I sort of imagine like the tip of an iceberg, so that you feel like there's this whole world underneath that tip, but all you really need is what you're seeing on the page. And then you feel the weight of everything else riding beneath it, but it's just not necessary in the way that in a novel you have all the space to tell all of the story, and you get it all there in a longer piece. It was a little inelegant, but
Not at all. I know just what you mean with like you're suggesting a whole history or a whole
Mhm.
family's history, and in many ways, short stories require greater writing skill, or at least a more focused writing skill of finding just the right detail that will evoke a whole history or shared history between two people or a family history. So, yeah, your stories are so economical in the way that you suggest deep wells of history between the characters and the relationships, particularly between mothers and daughters and grandmothers and granddaughters, sisters. These sort of female relationships, I think, are a main source of a focus in this collection. Uh,
Mhm.
they're so rich. I want to talk about, I guess, one of the themes that might be kind of uniting a lot of the stories in this collection are the way that you play with fairy tales and mythology and magic and that sort of thing in stories. And you and I have talked about our interest in this. And in fact, when Mary introduced us and talked about us as potentially as a mermaid and a nun, I think that's actually a good analogy for some of our own obsessions as writers. You know, mythical creatures or fantastical creatures are something that come up in your writing a lot. So could you talk a bit about how fairy tales inspire you, how these existing frameworks of stories, how do you use them, how do you kind of make them your own, and what's your process of kind of mining existing mythologies and turning them into your own stories?
Yeah, no, I know we have talked about this a lot. It's a really fun topic to discuss, especially with you. Just for anyone who doesn't know Blair's wonderful book, The Devoted, really quickly, it is this amazing story about a woman who is studying Zen Buddhism and becomes entangled with her Buddhist master. And it's a wonderful story of spirituality and plumbing the depths of yourself and self-discovery. And I think we've talked a lot about the overlap in some ways between spirituality and mythology and how
Mhm.
they're sort of coming from the same place. And so I'd love to talk more about that with you as
Mhm.
it relates to your book as well. But as far as Animal Wife, yeah, I grew up reading short stories, loving the darker side of these stories, their origins, and how
Yeah,
they,
just to interrupt you there, do
yeah.
you always feel like did you always have an interest in kind of the dark underside of fairy tales? Because of course, a lot of us start with a kind of Disneyfied version
Hmm.
of many fairy tales, but the older and more original version of many of these is so much darker and so much more violent and
Yeah.
has a lot of blood, gore, and death, really. And I see that sort of throbbing potential for violence or a direct engagement with it in many of the stories in Animal Life. So yeah, just to
Yeah.
go back to your own original attachment to fairy tales, were you always drawn to the dark side of fairy tales?
I was, yeah. Yeah, it was always about the the eeriness of them, the transformations, and what they said about the characters and the societies in which the characters live, that they felt the need to put on costumes or to transform and able to, in order to escape their circumstances or to raise themselves up in some way. Like if we think about Cinderella rising from the ashes um, to the castle by putting on this costume and becoming something other than herself, or
Mm.
the sort of the flip side, the princess who had to flee the castle because her own father wanted to marry her, who puts on this sort of wild woman costume to hide in the forest. So the idea of these costumes and transformations as a means to escape really drew me in, particularly in the stories about women. Um, because when these stories were written, really women were very constrained. They were limited by their families, by their circumstances, by their societies. And so a lot of these stories are sort of coming out of that feeling of entrapment.
Hmm. Mhm.
Yeah, and there's a lot of possibility of violence, like you say, in that.
Yeah, definitely. And how does that connect? So when you're writing, I thought maybe you could kind of walk us through how one of these stories in the collection came to be. So Animal Life, perhaps, or I'm so interested in the story of, and I'm forgetting its name now, The Vanishing Point, right? Of the woman who transforms herself into a deer, basically, which is such a fascinating story for all of you listening. They're all interesting, but yeah, if you could sort of walk us through, like, how did the idea first come to you, and how did you start, sort of, how did it change as you started writing and evolving? How did it develop?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think the first one, Animal Wife, the title story in the collection, is a good example there of a story that started out as being one thing and completely became another thing. That was the first story that I wrote in the collection, and it started as a novel. So I thought it was going to be a novel. Speaking of a short story as that tip of the iceberg, so underneath the tip of this story is about 500 pages worth of novel that I discarded when I realized that it just was not working. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and maybe I'll go back to that someday, but I really think it was meant to be a short piece. I think by cutting out the 500 pages of a romance and the mother's point of view and like all of these extraneous things, I really carved down to the heart of what I was trying to express was really this one character, the daughter's perception of her mother who's disappeared. And that sort of strange place when you're not quite an adult yet, but you're not a child, and you're at that threshold of understanding things in the adult world that are beyond your grasp. So how to kind of write a character like that who senses that there are parts of her parents' lives that she does not have access to and doesn't understand, but really wants to in order to bring her mother home and what that might look like. So that big novel became a short story and kicked off the collection from there.
Oh, that's great. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that happens surprisingly commonly. My own novel started, it was the reverse, where it started as a short story that was a failure of a short story, and it didn't seem like it was the right form. And so I needed time to expand it. So it's so interesting how changing up the form of something can make it work suddenly.
Yeah.
It can make the story come to the fore the way you want it.
Mm-hmm.
You're mentioning something that I wanted to ask you about, which is about this idea of how the collection in many ways kind of traces the stages of growing up, or there is a sort of loose idea where we see the stories kind of following girlhood, and then we see women becoming adults and then moving on and becoming parents of themselves. So yeah, I was just interested in how that idea came together. Were you consciously writing stories to develop a kind of progression of growing up and becoming a parent, or did these come together, did you decide to order that after you'd already written them and were thinking about what connected them?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So when I wrote that first story, Animal Wife, the next couple stories I wrote were very much in that vein of young adulthood, of that threshold between childhood and adulthood. And so you see the next few stories in the collection are sort of in that vein. But I became a little less interested in that that area as I began considering motherhood, and my attention turned toward adult characters and grown women, particularly those who are struggling with the question of whether they wanted to be mothers and what their identity is. So you see that in Desiree the Destroyer and some of the other stories about women really struggling with their concept of selfhood.
Yeah.
And then probably about the time that I started writing the later stories, I was pregnant and sort of thinking of projecting ahead to worst case scenarios of what it might be to lose oneself, to to a new identity, in that motherhood is in some ways a loss of self. And that was my biggest fear. But I've since found, and I wonder if you felt the same thing now that you're also a mother,
Mhm.
that it just sort of opened up new parts of myself as opposed to erasing the parts of myself I was afraid to lose. So that's been a
Yeah.
relief. But you don't really see that in the book because that
It's
wouldn't be
about
quite as interesting.
at this collection, I definitely see it being about kind of about the fears and the concerns around that loss of self and loss of
Hmm.
identity. And it's true, absolutely. It is a kind of looming fear. I think for many women who are considering becoming parents, it's absolutely one of the biggest concerns.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think you're right that in many ways, as with many forms of change in our lives, it's not always like a death and a total loss. It's more like where it's just change. We sort of
Hmm.
change our identities and we don't lose everything of ourselves. So
Yeah.
that's the way I'm sort of feeling about it now. As a parent of a very young child with lots more to learn, that's what I'm feeling so far.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, your stories deal with that struggle, I think, of kind of entrapment or imprisonment that many women feel at different stages of their lives so
Hmm.
well. And they use sometimes fantasy elements and sometimes just realistic elements to show that. I did want to ask you about this idea of how many of the stories, of course, have this element of transformation where a woman is transforming herself into something else. And do you see those transformations as more sort of curses, dark things, or more as sort of blessings or liberations? Because a lot of the transformations that the women undergo, um, their lives get more complicated, but they're also sort of liberated by their transformations, perhaps. So how are you seeing transformation overall in these stories?
Yeah, no, I think definitely in some cases, liberation, some cases, further entrapment, maybe a little bit of both. I think the the intention behind it, is definitely that a lot of women in the stories see transformation as a form of liberation or escape. Like the woman in Vanishing Point who creates this mechanical deer suit to live in the woods as a deer sees this as a means um, to escape and to live a more a simpler life away from all of the parts of her existence that she's found unsatisfactory.
Hmm.
But in transforming, then in the woods, this mechanical suit rubs up against her human body, and she's more aware of herself than she's ever been. So, the method in which she tried to transform sort of made her all the more human. And I think that became a running theme of the stories is that, there really is no transforming yourself or escaping yourself. There's maybe, yeah, I think that's the case. And like, there was another story I was going to mention. Oh, in Burn Rubber, the woman who becomes psychologically trapped in her car keeps trying
Yeah.
to drive away from her life, but still finds herself circling back to her house and her office and the park. So all these same places, and she just, for whatever reason, can't drive beyond the bounds of her life. So there's another sort of form of transformation in that she's transformed into this creature stuck within the bounds of her vehicle, but again, it's not really a form of escape in the end.
Right, right. Yeah, that's Burn Rubber is one of my favorites in this collection because it is willing to show a woman, a female character sort of on the edge and engaged with extremes in a way that
Mhm.
I think not not commonly fiction is engaged with. Like it's common to see sort of like a diary of a madman of a male character, I think, but it's less common to see a sort of a woman on the edge who makes an extreme choice in some
Mhm.
ways. I don't want to spoil it too much for our listeners, but it's a tightly drawn, suspenseful story that goes to surprising places and really had me thinking about first, like, would it be possible to do what she does in a way, you know, and
Right.
sort of thinking about those hypotheticals. And I'm sure you had to think it through, you know, about how she would make her choice work and to still be staying in her car. But also engaging in on this, yeah, this sort of dangerous emotional territory of whether she is fully in control of her sanity, of her life, or whether she's, as you're saying, sort of stuck in a loop, which I think is really, really interesting to see.
Yeah.
Around related to that, sort of characters who are on the edge or on a dangerous precipice. Do you see some of the women characters in this collection are very angry? I would say there's a lot of anger in some of these
Yeah.
characters related to their feelings of being trapped, perhaps. Do you feel like you need to, is there anything special you have to do as a writer to sort of access that anger and let it loose on the page?
Oh,
Um, yeah,
that's
it's
a
just
good question.
knowing you as a friend, you're a sweet, gentle, lovely person. Though
Well,
you're
thank
capable, yeah. How do you, I think this is something I struggle with myself. How do you access anger and put it on the page?
No, thank you. I think the page is the only place I feel comfortable accessing anger. Maybe this is a little too like much of a therapy session, but um, because I am a very usually pretty calm and patient person, I don't feel comfortable with expressing anger,
Hmm.
even when I am angry, and of course I'm angry just like anyone else. So yeah, so writing is a place where I feel like I can express anger because it's through someone else, it's through a character, and it's okay if that character is unlikable. And a lot of the women in this collection are unlikable characters, or they're, if not, hateful, they're just maybe difficult to sympathize with sometimes. Um, and it's freeing in a way. So I'm not sure it took me too much effort to tap into that because it was a relief. It's sort of a joy to be able to write someone who expresses the feelings that I don't feel comfortable expressing. And I do have a lot of anger, particularly around the societal structures built up around motherhood, and particularly working motherhood, which you see in Burn Rubber. I feel as though um, our generation has been told that we can have it all, and that we not only can have families, but we can have careers and then fulfilling passions like writing or whatever sort of other passions we might have, and um, solid relationship with our spouses. And I'm finding that impossible. I think it's impossible to have it all because society hasn't caught up to that idea yet, and there's no support in place to
Hmm.
help women to do it.
Yeah.
So yes, I have a career, and I have a child, but my child spends most of her day in daycare, and it's prohibitively expensive. So it's not an opportunity that's extended to all women. So it's very unfair to say women now can have it all, when the burden is still on women to make that possible. And
Mhm.
then when we're not able to have it all, we feel guilty as though there's something wrong with us, that we can't figure out how to balance our lives in a different way so that we can do all of these things and still be successful and 100% at all of them. So that's a lot of the anger that went into the stories in this collection. Um,
Mhm.
and the sense that um, you get so tired, I think, of trying to fight those battles of extending your maternity leave or working from home or all of the things that make it easier, that some of these characters are like the woman in Burn Rubber, are just like, oh, I'm just gonna drive away. Like I'm
Yeah,
just gonna take a break from all of it.
absolutely.
So that was a long answer to a really good question.
Well put.
Thank
How
you.
there's a kind of, how can we not be angry about the ways that society has sort of set us up? Almost like it's kind of it's a myth, it's a fairy tale that women
Yeah.
can be sort of all things,
Mhm.
particularly women, but parents and other people in these sort of situations. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
maybe now would be a good time for a little break with a musical interlude. And when we come
Absolutely.
back, yeah, when we come back, I'll love to switch gears a little and talk more about your writing process and that sort of thing.
Sounds great.
Great. So Pearl, take it away.
Great. This song is called Unravel You. And it just made me think of it because you guys are talking about fairy tales, and it's not about a fairy tale at all, but I feel like the feel of it is a little fairy tale-ish, so that's where we're going. Me unravel you. That is all I'd like to do, and by the time I'm through with you, we'll never be apart. I wanna set you free, unlock your mystery. The trouble with a riddle, see, is that I need to solve. I see further, I see rain. I feel your silence and I hear your pain. I see all of these things that you've done, but I can't hold against you. To unfathom you is not something I can do. I tried a time or two, it's true. You'll just have to believe. We are one and the same. Don't care who takes the blame. The whole point of our universe is to be reunited. I see further, I see rain. I feel your silence and I hear your pain. I see all of these things that you've done, but I can't hold against you. No, I can't hold against you. And I can't hold against you.
Thank you so
Beautiful.
much.
Thank you, Pearl.
It was gorgeous. I realized I almost forgot before we switch gears to sort of brass tacks writing process questions. We should have Lara. Would you like to read a brief excerpt from Animal Wife? It would be great to hear.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely. Let's see. Okay. We'll read just a few pages of Desiree the Destroyer. Okay, this is the beginning. Eve's doctor recommends she draw a map of her breasts to become familiar with their topography. Eve imagines such a map, veined with blue-green rivers, the ridge of her breastbone, a mysterious world she never wants to visit. Desiree the Destroyer's breasts overflow her spandex jumpsuit, and she dusts them with glitter so they catch the cage lights. She knows how to make an impression. Her spiked knee pads leave puncture wounds in her competitor's thighs. Her mother sews her costumes with liberal use of sequins. Desiree the Destroyer designs her own capes. When Eve was growing up, her mother sewed her clothes from 10-cent pattern books. Their covers depicted girls in ruffled dresses. In middle school, the other girls teased Eve, but she couldn't tell her mother she wanted clothes from the mall. Eve is 30, and her mother still makes her dresses. At 30, Desiree the Destroyer still lives with her mother, who lures practice partners into the garage with milk and cookies. The pesticide sprayer from next door, the throat clearer from across the street, the drag racer from down the block. As the door slides shut behind them, they blink in confusion. Cookies crumble in their fists. Desiree the Destroyer strides down the stairs from the mudroom, her cape billowing, her décolletage glittering. They freeze in wonder before her. There was the creep who parked his van across from the elementary school. Desiree the Destroyer crushed his groin. There was the paper boy who lobbed the Sunday edition through her mother's sun porch window. Desiree the Destroyer planted her knee on his neck and made him weep for mercy. There was the Doberman that terrorized small children. Desiree the Destroyer tore out its throat. Eve is a champion of the English language. She arranges her office supplies parallel to the edges of the desk and does not initiate conversation with the other proofreader, Nancy, who shares her cubicle. Nancy is the type of woman Eve could easily become if she were less vigilant. Nancy signs her emails THX. She wears low-cut shirts that reveal her collarbones. She uses both drink tickets at the company holiday party. Nancy has an online dating profile. Still, Eve is eager to appear friendly. She knows everyone's birthday and favorite donut. She approaches opposite relationships with the same precision she devotes to tracking her time. Her boss has suggested she is perhaps too diligent, though he appreciates her attention to detail. When she tries to ease up, her attention to detail drags her back into thoroughness. Eve fears she is a car with blown-out brakes sliding down a hill. No one is looking. She slips her fingers into her shirt. Desiree the Destroyer can crush a skull between her thighs. Sometimes she squeezes just enough to make a competitor pass out. Some men like that. Every Monday at 9, Eve watches cage fighting. She treats herself to low-cal popcorn and takes notes in a dedicated spiral-bound notebook. Desiree the Destroyer grips the chain link enclosure and throws her head back as the spectator's screams throb through her body. They love it, but she doesn't do it for them. She is enthralled to her desires. This is what makes her such a successful sexual partner. Desiree the Destroyer wears her cape to bed, and she is always on top.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. It is so fierce.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Yeah, no, I think fierce is a good word, and it ties into transition. A question from Mary here in the chat. She says the expression of anger or lack of expression for women always seems to be so difficult. In your opinions, why is that? Ooh. It's something I've been trying to figure out for 30 years. It looks like Blair might have an idea there.
You don't have, I think it's a good question. It's an ongoing question. And it is something that I think women and girls are, it's a lot about socialization from a young age. I feel that we're encouraged to be sort of disassociate from our own anger and to see it as an unacceptable emotion from a young age, to kind of separate ourselves out from our own anger. And what I think is the flip side of anger is desire as well, because anger is often about asserting your desires for something clearly and forcefully, to say, I want this, and I want this to stop, and I want this. And not being able to say that, I think, is something that maybe a lot of women struggle with because of the way that they're raised. And just like a larger cultural atmosphere. There's something that I think about a lot when I was studying in an English class in university. We studied the philosophy of Rousseau, and Rousseau had a lot to say about child raising and the appropriate ways to raise children well. And one thing that he said in one of his documents was, girls should continually be interrupted at any task that they are in the middle of, because you should teach them that whatever they're trying to do is less important than fulfilling anyone else's needs. And I was always so struck by that as a concept that I think still holds true today in many ways, that I think girls and women are often taught to tend to other people's moods, emotions, and needs, and to care for others, and to neglect their own emotions. So yeah, I think it's something that makes me angry from time to time when I think about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, as fiction writers, maybe you feel this too, Laura. You were starting to talk about this. Fiction is an outlet for writing characters who are accessing their anger, and it's often a way that I feel freer to do it. Maybe because it is one step removed from my own personal experience. But yeah, how do you? What do you think? What are your theories about this?
Yeah, no, I love, well, so I love everything that you said. I had not heard the Rousseau
Yeah,
statement
it's so
before, but
sincere.
yeah, I'm not surprised by that. I mean, it is what we are conditioned to do, to put everyone's needs before our own, whether it's our husbands or spouse, I should say. And then um, it becomes even, the stakes get higher then when you have children, because the expectation is that you put the children first. And while of course we should raise and support our children, and their needs are often more what's the word I'm looking for, more pressing than our own, because they can't do things for themselves. I think it's very easy to forget to make time to take care of your own needs. And it's become this culture of self-care, which is just one of those words that sounds trendy when it really shouldn't be. But you feel kind of like you're being silly, I guess, if you're taking that time for yourself and doing something to take care of your own needs, because it sounds like something you'd read in Vogue or whatever, take time and go get a pedicure or something. But I also
Yeah,
think,
totally.
oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, just on that notion of self-care, it's sort of it's irritating because they make it sound like it's this novel, new, trendy
Right.
thing, even though it really should be just kind of a fundamental aspect of leading a healthy life. I think being
Right.
able to care for yourself and giving yourself what it needs. So yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
absolutely. No, yeah, and I was thinking about then what you said about fiction and accessing anger through these characters. And I feel lucky in a sense with the genre that I'm writing in, and I think that you're writing in as well, with literary fiction, that we can create characters that are tapped into their anger and that are often unsympathetic and unlikable, because I think there's still the expectation that women characters should be likable. Maybe a little bit less so in literary fiction, but definitely in like romance and in particularly in what they call women's fiction, although I have strong feelings about books
Yeah.
that are shoved aside as women's fiction also. But why should women characters be likable when we have so many wonderful male characters that are the most lauded characters in the history of literature, who are so flawed male characters? If we think about like Humpert and you know Leopold Bloom and all of these most famous male characters, they're all pretty unlikable. And a lot of them do leave their families. Like we were talking before about how women, we don't see a lot of women who leave their families, who do that sort of unspeakable thing in literature. And when writing Burn Rubber, when the woman drives away, I was thinking a lot about Run Rabbit, and about the character in that book by Updike that just drives away and he just leaves his family. And I think it's accepted that he's sort of a reprehensible character, and his wife in the book is represented as this sort of alcoholic baby murderer, and like sort of like, well, yeah, of course he needs to escape that lady. So
Right. It's his sort of private liberation that's more important than the wife and child that he's leaving behind.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we were talking about similarities in our themes, even though we write using very different maybe modes or thematic imagery. I'm interested in this sort of spiritual metaphors and spirituality. I think we're both haunted by a similar problem at that heart of sort of what it means for a woman to transgress and
Hmm.
to step outside the boundaries of acceptability. And we've both explored that, I think.
Oh yeah.
um yeah, Animal Wife. And yeah, just the story that you just read from Desiree the Destroyer, I think is such a great example of this kind of duality of female identity too, that I think is all over this collection too, a sense of a woman being torn in two.
Hmm.
um I just wanted to quote one of your microfictions, the little short piece called Kite in your collection, which was so gorgeous. I'll just quote two lines from it because I think um, it maybe embodies a lot of some of the problems and questions you're exploring. So it starts with, she will not be constrained by the word mom, with those lines hedging in the O like a trapped breath. And then later on, she feels alive like a soaring kite and ignores the pull from far below as if someone were tugging the string. So powerful. And that feeling of soaring free and also being tugged. The metaphor of the kite, I think, is really powerful there, because there's something free and liberating about a kite up in the sky flying, but of course it's always held by the string. And even when it says that she ignores the pull, it somehow acknowledges the pull at the same time,
Yeah.
which I think
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
really beautiful there. So yeah, so many of these stories beautifully explore a kind of duality of female identity. It's not a question; it's just an admiring statement about these beautiful stories.
Yeah.
um, I did say I was going to just switch over to some questions about your process, and sort of
Hmm.
in a concrete way for any writers that are in the audience. And if any of you have questions, you'd like to put them in the chat, please do. Um, for a couple, some concrete process things that I'd love to have to hear. How is your drafting process? What is it like? So how do you like to lay down a story? Do you plan? Do you outline? Do you think about the big ideas first? Or do you go blind into a story and see where it takes you?
Yeah, I go pretty blind. Um, I've tried to outline before, and I would say, I mean, plot is hard for everyone probably, but it's one of the hardest things for me to think
Hmm.
in an orderly way, oh, what should come next, and how will I fill, if it's a story, 10 pages, or if it's a novel like I'm working on now, how will I fill 250 pages? That's so daunting to me. Um,
Mhm.
I think most of the stories that I've written have started with a couple lines that just sort of popped into my head somehow. Um,
Mhm.
and behind those lines, I know there's a story. I just don't really know what it is.
Mhm.
Um, so the fun of it to me is kind of figuring out what that is. And often I will just write, and it's not the most efficient way of writing a draft, but I will just write and write and write, usually longhand. Until I have enough of something to type it up so that I'm not staring at a blank screen, and
Mhm.
then go in and start sort of muddling through it and shaping it into what it is eventually going to become. So it's probably more like it's not like, I've heard some writers say that they're like marble sculptors. They have like the block of marble and then they carve it away and there's the story inside.
It's just like removing what's not story
Yes,
there.
yeah, and but when you think about it, when you do that, you cannot make a mistake. I mean, if you cut off a piece of marble that needs to be someone's arm, you can't put it back
Hmm.
on. So I don't quite know where I was going with that, except that I think of it more like clay, just lumping a bunch of stuff together and then having the ability to like pull something off or put something back over here, and really just kind of playing with it to see what emerges. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, that said, the story I'm working on now, the novel, I did a lot
Mhm.
of dictating to myself. So I would work through the plot by talking to myself, and then it came out a lot more efficiently than past drafts where I did muddle a lot more. So that was a sort of a revelation to me.
That is a great pro tip, I think, for
Yeah.
anyone out there working on their stories. Because I often give advice in my own, when I'm teaching, I tell writers to read their work aloud once they're revising it, because it can often identify a lot of problems. But I had never thought of trying to talk it out when you're still in the concept phase.
Yeah.
And absolutely, I think that could really help identify gaps or help you plan. Wow.
Yeah, I had not thought of it before either until I was commuting, and like there's 2 hours of the day where I'm just kind of sitting there. So I thought I might as well just use my phone and talk into my phone and record it. And then there's a great dictation app called Otter. And there are probably a bunch of others too. I mean, transcribing apps. So it will transcribe your dictation pretty accurately. And most of it is just kind of junk, but every time I've done it, I've gotten something. And it's usually plot related, where I puzzled through something in my head. And by the time I get home, I figured something out.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, you all heard it here first. It sounds like a really great thing to try. And just since you were mentioning your next work in progress, I don't know how much you feel comfortable talking about it, but if you want to talk just a little bit about what you're working on now and how it connects to this fascinating essay that's out in LitHub today about your experience at Mermaid Camp, which sounds so fascinating.
Mermaid Camp. Yeah, so it came out today in LitHub. This is an essay that I wrote about Mermaid Camp last summer. It was at Weeki Wachee State Park in Florida. And this is related to the novel. It's not what it's about strictly, but so Weeki Wachee State Park has what they call the Siren Show, and it's been going on since about 1946, 47. And it's women who perform as mermaids, so with lycra tails, in a submerged theater. And they perform before a row of windows, and they breathe oxygen through these little rubber hoses that are attached to oxygen tanks below the surface. So they can stay down there for like half an hour. And they dance in the tails. They do sort of amazing gymnastics and tricks and things. And they perform for Elvis and in films and all of this stuff.
I've seen the pop culture. I've seen these women. I didn't even know how they were staying down so long. I didn't understand if they were holding their breath or what was going on.
No, I mean they can hold their breath for like 4 minutes. These women, but then they need something to breathe. And so the camp is taught by legendary sirens, so women who performed in the heyday of Weeki Wachee. So often they're from the 60s and 70s, and they're still performing now. And you go and you wear the tail, and they teach you how to do all the performance tricks and everything. And I am not a good swimmer, and I have trouble opening my eyes underwater, and and it was terrifying to me, but it was the most amazing experience. And back to your question, it was research for the novel because it is about a place in which women perform as sirens wearing these tails, and I had to feel for myself what that felt like.
That's so fascinating, and then getting that firsthand experience will just inform your writing. So that's a great thing, that even though it's not something it sounds like you'd be the most comfortable with, you're willing to do it, which is great.
I recommend it to anyone who's remotely interested. It's worth it.
It sounds very on theme of your interest, of the ways that women can kind of transform into the fantastic identities as well, which is so fascinating to see. I was just loving your story, Desiree the Destroyer, again, about this idea of how transformation, we've been talking about that, how it has sort of downsides, but it can also be so tremendously joyful and fierce and powerful, as a way of liberation or empowerment. And I think that story captures that so beautifully.
No, thank you for saying joyful too. I think I've been making a lot of the ferocity and the anger, but hopefully it reads that a lot of the women in here do find empowerment, and if not joy, at least empowerment through their transformations. So that's good to hear.
I definitely feel that, and we should make that clear that it's also a powerful thread in Animal Wife for sure. The sort of the joy of this, what would I say, of a kind of self-reliance or self-determination that many of the women are striving for in the stories. Do I have? Oh yes, I just have this other question that I was curious about, because when I was rereading your collection and enjoying the story so much, this is tapping into one of my great struggles myself as a writer, and I was just really admiring your endings, actually. How tight they are, how there's a burst of pleasure or surprise or insight in every one of these stories. So I'll ask you a tough question, which is, how do you make a good ending to a story? What are you looking for when you're finishing a story? To like, what kind of experience are you trying to leave your reader with? Or do you have tips for writers on making a killer ending for a story?
Yeah, I think it, well, obviously depends on the story, but I think probably kind of an obvious tip is that the last line needs to be, as good as the first line of the story, if not better, because that's what people will remember, is that end. And I feel like a bad ending or an ending that falls flat can just, in retrospect, make the whole story feel a little weaker, like a little less memorable, even if the rest of it is phenomenal. So I spend a lot of time on the endings. Yeah. I think too, something that I struggled with for a long time, and then I feel like I worked out through these stories, was the feeling that an end doesn't need to tie everything up in a bow, that a lot can be left unsaid, as long as like I would say, like in The Vanishing Point, the story about the woman who becomes a deer, and I don't want to ruin the ending, but there's certainly not necessarily a resolution to that story. But there's a sense that the story continues beyond the page, and that we've reached a moment at which that new story might begin. So yeah, that we've come to the end of an arc, and that it's maybe a small arc in a bigger story that we just don't have access to, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
But I spent a lot of time before this thinking that a story needs to end in a way that resolves a moth just flew by, that resolves all of the problems and answers all the questions. And I think that is, there's certainly nothing wrong with a story that does that, but a story doesn't have to do that. And I think forcing that type of ending can ruin a lot of really good stories.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. I love what you're mentioning about how the story, like the world of the story, there's a sense that it's larger than where we're choosing to step out of the story. And that makes the story kind of resonate beyond the page, I think.
Yeah.
So I think we should, I don't think I missed any questions, but perhaps we should transition over to one last song from our lovely musician.
Yes, let's do that. And before we do, I'll just say thank you. Oh, here's Perl coming back on. But thank you, Blair. Your questions have been wonderful, and this has been so much fun to be able to have the chance to talk with you.
You are. It's been just wonderful. Everyone, first of all, this amazing cover will just like grab your eye when you see it. And so cool. But this is such a fantastic collection, and it gives you such a great sense of satisfaction as a reader to see the stories sort of together and telling a larger story as well, about life, about fairy tales, about womanhood, about growing up. All sorts of amazing ideas are in here. And I haven't even mentioned enough about how gorgeous your writing is, Lara, in this, but every line, it's tight.
Thank you, Blair. And I'm going to hold yours up again too. There we go. With a big glare on it there. The Devoted. Likewise, I think it takes one to know one with prose. You're a beautiful writer, and this is such a rich and powerful story. And it's been my pleasure to pick your brain a little bit too as this moth just got.
Yeah, it's so great to hear about your process and your thoughts
Yes,
with this.
and of course we'll keep talking. But thank you also to Medicine Street, to Mary and Beth as well for having us. And we'll turn it into Pearl here. So we'll say thanks to you too for joining us, Pearl. I'm just so excited to hear your music, and I think you've helped us make this event exceptional. So thank you.
Thank you. I was just turning another camera on. That's where I'm going. Well, you guys are awesome. Everything you're doing is awesome, and I'm glad that I got to be a part of it. So hopefully we'll get to do more events like this. Hopefully in person one day soon. That'd be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And
oh, sorry.
Oh, nope, that's okay. I was just going to turn it over to you.
Great.
For the last song, I was actually just going to do the title track of my album, Late Bloomer. I was deciding between an angrier sounding song because that's what you guys were talking about. But then I was like, no, I think this is a good one. This song is about not giving up on yourself, no matter how long it takes you to get something done. So like for me, I'm a big procrastinator, and then I'm a little bit of a perfectionist too. So if I don't start on time or I don't do it exactly how I wanted to, I'm like, forget it. I'll just push it off indefinitely now. So this song is about how it's never too late, and no matter what effort you make, it's worthwhile. So yeah, anyway, the song is Late Bloomer. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I hope everyone has an awesome night. Give me the time of day and I'll squander it. I'm always 10 minutes too late. No matter what time I hit the road, I keep on moving, I keep on improving myself. No matter how hard I try, I'm always behind. Sometimes it feels like I'm losing. I want to run and hide. I keep on moving, I keep on improving myself. I'm a late bloomer. I would have started this sooner. But everything I dream and everything I've seen, they take me where I need to be. I'm a late bloomer. I would have started this sooner. But if I didn't know what I know now, I would not know how to be free. There was a time I was blind, I was petrified. But little by little I started to open my eyes. I keep on moving, I keep on improving myself. I'm a late bloomer. I would have started this sooner. But everything I dream and everything I've seen, they take me where I need to be. I'm a late bloomer. I would have started this sooner. Oh, yeah. But if I didn't know what I know now, I would not know how to be free. And better late than never is really more than just clever. Take it from me.
Thank you, Pearl. That was beautiful. Thank you. We want to give thanks very much to Perl Wolfe, who just sung her title song from her most recent release, Late Bloomer. Thank you. I love the songs that you chose because I love the way they married with both Blair and Lara's books. I thought it was really a beautiful intertwining of theme and the stories and the music and some female empowerment going on. It was really great. Thank you. And remember, everybody, Pearl is in Chicago, so you can see her locally, I would assume, right?
True. Well, I mean, not too many live places yet, but
well,
yeah.
That's true. Sorry, I always like when I think about that, I forget about COVID. which is
I know,
why we're
right?
all virtual tonight and not here in the store. So, but yes, Chicago artists, very happy to have you. Thank you. Laura and Blair, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to have you on. And both of your books are obviously fantastic. I really, again, loved the themes. I loved, and I knew this going in, but I didn't want to say it in the intro, but I do think thematically you guys are really on a certain parallel. And it really makes for a nice tie-in. So I would urge everybody, here comes my public service announcement. I would urge everybody to buy both books. Needless to say, from madstreetbooks.com, but also either from your, if you can't get online and get to us, definitely go to your local independent bookstore and purchase both books, because I think everyone would be in for a treat. I'd also like to thank Beth Golay, who is our woman behind the curtain. Without Beth, we would never be able to get all of our media stuff off the ground, because were I the person we were counting on, this never would work. So many, many thanks to Beth for being here with us on another Mad Street Madness virtual event. And Lara and Blair, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you.